We'd like to welcome Gerald Kongstvedt with us today. Today's date is January 20th, 1988, and Jerry has consented to come over and talk to us a little bit about the old days at Walden, which we've lost track of a little bit. Jerry, what I'd like you to do is just give us your impressions of what it was like the first year or so, telling us a little bit about the staff and the student body in those first years at Walden.
My goodness, that's like deciding what happened on the sixth day of the creation of the earth. Because it was well, I always wanted to be a teacher, and I always wanted a place to teach where I could teach the way I wanted to teach. And when Walden opened, that's what it was. I spent the 10 happiest years of my life here. And the first year was really interesting because we threw away all the conventional patterns. And what we were looking for was a way in which the students who had chosen to come, there were about 145 11th and 12th graders that first year. The students who chose to come were pretty bright people who had been turned off by so many traditional fixed ways of learning that they just had stopped learning. And the main thing that we did that first year was to try to reinstall in those people the feeling that they were in charge of their life, or at least their life was their own responsibility, which is always true no matter what. Your life is your own responsibility. But you can excuse yourself by saying, the system did this to me, the system did this to me. And so we removed the system. And we had to invent a new one. And inventing the new one, it was so tempting to go back to the old system because we all knew that, but the teachers who chose to come wanted to do what we were doing too, which was to find out what is teaching about, how do you do it, and what's the connection between teaching and learning, and are they the same thing, or are they, I mean, we had to learn in order to teach, and some of the kids had to teach us things so that we could help them learn things about like what I'm doing right now. I'm talking to you. I'm not sure that you're listening. And I don't mean that as a crack or a comment, but how do I make sure that there's something going on between us instead of just me doing this and you sitting there very patiently rubbing your eye? Now, that's where we were when we started. And that's where we are right this minute. Now, what do we do with this minute? How do we turn this minute into something that's going to make the next, how long are we going to be here? Hour, 45 minutes? Whatever. How do we turn that into something where I'm useful to you in a way that you need me to be an adjunct of what you are trying to learn? Are you really trying to learn something? Or are you just here because you have to be in school and the law says you must be in school and you'll be patient and kind and gentle and let me do what I'm doing? Or do you really want to be here? And if you really want to be here and there's something that you want and I can help provide it or John can help provide it, how do we go about doing it so that it works? So the first day that we sat there, we didn't know what to do. So we cleaned up the building. It took a week. The building had been left in a shambles with garbage and all kinds of stuff. And we had a big fight over who was going to have which room and how they were going to use it.
That hadn't been determined by anyone ahead of time.
No, it was just like walking onto an island with people from 7 different countries, and each one of them having to find out how they're going to fit together. And then we had a big meeting in which the board everything that everybody wanted to learn. And we filled all the blackboards, and we finally had to go to a different room and fill the blackboards there, and we made a copy of all this stuff. And then everybody went through and kind of checked off what they really wanted. And we tallied all these and put them together, and we finally began to get a kind of a pattern. And then we figured out how to do this. For example, English, which is what I originally taught when I came there. What do you teach in English? Well, you can teach sentence structure, and you can teach how to read a book by giving you Silas Marner. Which, remember, did you get Silas Marner when you were in high school?
Mm-hmm.
You escaped?
I escaped. I don't know how, but
I guess we stopped it before that. But, or we figure out, or we could break English into little things like how do you decide what words are supposed to do? Is that grammar, or is that semantics, or is that literature, or is it advertising? Or so that's what we did. We went right back to figure out what everything that we'd been teaching was supposed to do and how to break it into parts that we could work with particularly, and then figure out which part has to come first. So the first year we all learned. We all learned a great deal.
did you start out with courses that lasted a week or 8 weeks or a semester, or how did you describe the process of filling the blackboard and then deciding what the curriculum would be? How long did that curriculum last for?
Well, we said about a quarter. We thought we'd run maybe to Thanksgiving the first year, and then decide as we went along what we had to change. So we knew that we weren't going to make artificial decisions or plans and then decide that, well, we decided that, so therefore we have to keep it going forever until we reach the date that we set. We decided that we would, if something didn't work, we would get rid of it. If the group wanted to stay together and do something else, we'd do that. If we decided that that was just a waste of time, we quit it and invented something new, or invented something out of what we discovered by being together. For example, we had a group that just wanted to read some interesting new stuff, like Richard Brodigan. One of the kids wanted to read some Richard Brodigan. It was kind of a cult thing at that time. And so we got at some of this poetry. And they didn't understand it, so I did some things with the poetry that helped them understand it. And they wanted to read some novels. And we found out we didn't have enough time, so we decided to meet in the evening, 2 days a week. So they'd all bring lunches to eat at supper, and sometimes we made supper there. And we had about 16 kids who wanted to be in this group, and all of a sudden it grew, and we had something like 30, including a couple of teachers and some kids from other schools. and it turned out to be a real interesting thing. So that, we had 145 people, and I think it was 7 staff. And it really doesn't have to be a confusing system where we divide everything. It's like starting to have a party, and then the party grows, and you have to send out for more food, and you have to get some more chairs, and you have to decide on are we going to let the party last all weekend, or are we going to put them Saturday morning, or what? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? So that first year was pretty fluid.
Do you feel that this early success of the school was the result of special students and special personalities as teachers, and that it was the kind of thing which maybe couldn't last too long? It was just a special moment at that time, and then it changed over the years, or do you feel that you had a kind of a typical group of students, 11th and 12th graders, and typical teachers?
No, they weren't typical in the sense of conventional typical. You know, think of the word typical as, I don't think any of these people in this room are typical. When you look at people with clean eyes, you know, in other words, where you don't put a typicalness on that person by the way you look at him, then he becomes typical. But if you can't do that, or don't do that, or choose not to do that, or the person keeps changing in front of you so that you have to keep adjusting your typicalness by which you're going to view him, that's one thing. We were a pretty open group, and there was nothing typical there. It was just, I don't suppose you could keep that going, but you could keep causing it to happen.
You've got your Robert Schuller cup. Come on in.
So I don't know how to answer that, really. It was really a wonderful time. A lot of work. Boy, we worked. And we suddenly discovered all kinds of things that we didn't know that we, I've been teaching for years by that time. And suddenly I realized I'm really not sure why I was doing that. And I had to go back and, I covered pages and pages and pages full of things because I had to write it out for myself so that, when you just sit and think, you think, there's that thought, and boy, you like it. Then you think the next thought, that's a good thought. Then you think another thought. Then you realize that, where did I begin? And so you could deceive yourself. And so I had to, for myself, I had to write out the things that I was doing and why I was trying to do them and what I was missing. And because I couldn't hide behind my authority, I couldn't hide behind the rules, I couldn't hide behind any of the excuses that we have to continue doing what we like to do. It was kind of fun.
Was the school helped by being in the McMinn building, by being in an older structure where students could paint the walls and claim it as their own? Do you think that was a helpful setting for that first year?
Yeah. It was kind of fun. The community said, those kids, they've just destroyed the inside of that building and they've got filthy things written all over the walls and all kinds of graffiti. So we got a reporter to come in and take pictures of the walls. There were really beautiful things on the walls. And in that first yearbook, the one with that's
that's one.
that one, yeah. Isn't there a page in there with graffiti on it someplace?
I haven't got to it yet.
It's either there or it's in the next one that follows that. But it was really interesting graffiti. And for example, there's a picture in there someplace. I had a room about this big, only the ceilings were about 4 feet higher than this. And it was dirty and dreary, and we had old garbage. In fact, there was a fall cleanup, where people put their garbage out and they put old couches and stuff out for people for the government to take away. Well, we had a couple of kids who had vans, and they circled the city and picked up all the old furniture they could find and brought it down, so that in a room like this, we had a couple tables and some chairs, and then we had some old couches and old easy chairs and stuff. And so when we'd have a class, you'd have these kids, some of them would be sleeping because they were really tired, because some of them worked full time. And some of them just wanted to sleep. And so I decided to decorate that room. And the first thing I did was to paint a great big picture of me sitting on a little stool, holding the earth in my hand with a question mark. And no matter where they sat, this great big picture was staring them in the face. And then somebody else wanted to put something on the wall, make a statement, and then I'd make a statement for that one. And pretty soon the whole wall was covered with all these beautiful, great big drawings. And when they tore the McMinn building down, I went down on the day that they were going to attack the room that I had had all those years, those 3 years we were there. And I really was tempted to come down there in the middle of the night, very carefully peel the plaster off that I had, take, maybe fasten it to something, and then take it off in the back and bring it back and put it in my playroom in the basement. So I don't know where we started with that, but it was.
But it did make everybody feel more comfortable to have, that was their building at the time.
Yeah, see, I think what it is that teachers, and I know I know this because this is what I was doing for a long part of the time that I taught 25 years before I came to Walden. You become a little defensive about what it is you know and what it is that you think you know and what it is that you know you don't know, and how you're going to get around all these things and still come off with a good image. So you do what you do to protect yourself. And then the same thing is true with the kids. They think, well, I have to go to school, and well, I'll get by as much as I can, or I want to learn everything I can, whatever the person is. But you get to a point where there really isn't any connection between the teaching and the learning. And so it kind of is a polite agreement that everybody's going to let it go on because we don't know what else to do. And when you decide, let's find out what it is that we should do and believe in it, each other, and argue with each other, and oh boy, we used to have some staff meetings that were vicious fights, but they never hurt the school because all they did was to bring out more and more and more of what we needed to know. Towards the end of the year, I had the feeling that staff meetings were becoming,
He's mumbling, I certainly don't agree with that.
so I'm not going to pay any more attention to it. And we used to have a lot of students at staff meetings. There were always maybe as many staff or students as staff, and they joined in. They had as much to say as we did. It was kind of interesting.
Do you think that Walden was a product of the 60s or of the book Summerhill or of any special outside influence of ideas?
Well, all those things did happen at the same time. I don't know if Jack mentioned on the tape that he had about, what was her name? Sherry, the English woman. Charity James. Did he mention her?
No, I don't think so.
Well, I'll tell you my version of how it started. And then you can get to know how. Jack was an intern teacher, and I was a supervising teacher. I met him in Madison when the state of Wisconsin sponsored a really innovative program that should have gone on and on and on, but people spoiled it. But Jack came at just the right time, and he wasn't real sure if he was going to teach, and he was working at a job in Madison, but he was finishing his master's degree in education, and that involved being in this intern program. And there was some doubt whether he was going to finish it, but we persuaded him to stay with the group in the summertime and to come to Park school as an intern, and he did, and he turned out to be the most fabulous teacher I ever met. He just was a real natural, and I persuaded him to apply for a job, and then I persuaded the director of personnel to hire him. And so he came to Park High to teach, and we taught together for a while, but then I got doing something else, and then I moved to Case High, so then he became good friends with Dave Johnston, who would come there out of the blue. And then they began working on their PhD, and they decided to...
It's all lies.
I know, but they're interesting lies.
Jerry Kameen promised he would come in right in the middle of something important and say, "It's all lies."
Well, I taught him how to lie. I mean, why shouldn't we recognize it?
This is it. It's all the people that are interested.
That's as many as we had in the staff.
Well, look
at
at
the
you,
old
you're
Walden.
23 minutes late yourself.
In fact, it kind of looks like the old staff at Walden.
Yeah, yeah, really does. So they decided that they were going to do a combined PhD thesis. You know, the paper that you have to do with a project on finishing a doctorate degree. So they decided to invent a school. And it was just at that time that I had gotten hornswoggled into taking an administration job at Park, because the activity director had quit abruptly, and they were building the new building, the addition to Park, and Mr. Ludeman was not feeling well, and he needed somebody that knew the building and knew the school, so he put the screws on me, and I came back, and I said I would stay as long as I needed to get the building completed, and then I was going to go back to teaching. But it was during that time that Jack and Dave were at the point where they had to do something about having a school if they were going to make their PhD work out. So, and I had some connections now in the city in the school board, central office. So between the two, we were able to put some things together. We had a meeting in the basement of my house, which is a big playroom, about this big, of some teachers and some students who were interested in such a school, and we had a good discussion. Then we had Charity James, who was a British education consultant, and she was in this country visiting alternative schools that had been developing around the country. The one in St. Paul, which we visited, and around some in California, and they were patterned after, all of them were patterned after Summerhill in a way. I don't know if you know about Summerhill, but it would be a little too complicated to explain it now, but there's some books on Summerhill that you can read. Pretty radical changes. And some of these worked and some of them didn't. Some of them were just cop-outs, and some of them were just so artificial and cutesy that they just were kind of nauseating. Some of them were good. And this group of teachers and some students, people like Maritha Pathak, I don't know if you know her or not. She had graduated from Park, and then she came here when we opened and had another year here as a postgraduate student, because she had been one of the founders and helped make it work, thought it out. And finally, the school board consented to trying it for 2 years. And we advertised. The advertisements brought a few people in, and then we talked to those people, and those people went out and found some more people until we finally ended up, we were supposed to have 150 people before we could start. We had 145, I think it was, and they let us start it anyway. We didn't have a place to hold this, to have school until 3 weeks before the school was due to open. And we tell you the one place that we were sure we could have gotten if nothing else showed up. You know that there's a brick building, a one-story brick building on State Street up near Merchant's Delivery. That was it was Bishop's Laundry.
Oh, yeah.
You know the building at all?
Yeah.
Drive by it sometime and see if that would have been a good place to go to school. Oh, and inside of it was just a massive shambles. It was, some of it was torn apart, garbage, just a miserable thing. And so we were kind of decided that's the only place we can go. I was in the hospital with hepatitis that summer too. And then 3 weeks before we opened school, we got the McMinn building from the city. They rented it to the school district. And we called every one of these students who were going to come and told them where to come and what to wear so that we could start cleaning out that building. And then everything worked. Then we were there for 2 years. At the end of the second year, by that time we really had some things worked out. We tested everybody, just unbelievable number of tests, and everything turned out positive. Everything was just better than it was even supposed to be. And we explained to everybody about what we were doing, why we were doing it, and they said, well, sure, we'll do it. Come on, let's do it. And so when we got through, in the spring of the second year, the school board had a meeting at Walden, at the McMinn building. And the students presented arguments, staff presented arguments, the school board asked us a lot of questions, asked the students a lot of questions. We even separated the students and the staff and let the students be questioned by the board, and then the staff was questioned by the board to find out if we kind of agreed with each other. And then they went into a private meeting, and 20 minutes after the meeting had started, they called us back in and they said, and Dick Nelson, who was superintendent at that time, said, we believe that you did what you said you were going to do, and we believe that you kind of know what you want to do, so we will give you a staff. Oh, it was the third year. No, it was the second year. And then we were told that we could only be there one more year, and the building was going to be torn down, but that we would be able to have a new building, a different building, in a year, and a staff, as long as we would move it down into the junior high school level. Because the junior high school age teachers, our parents of junior high school age kids wanted such a school too. And he said, we will give you a building, a staff, and a budget, and you make the kind of school that you think you should have. Isn't that true? This is like giving somebody a blank check and saying, here's a check for the rest of your life. Use it to make the kind of life that you think you want to be.
Do we have some questions here? Let me turn the camera, Nathan, get you in.
Now, when Jack and Dave first started on the ideals, when they come up with the, they wanted to bring the alternative school ideal to Racine, and whenever anybody comes up with a little pet project or a great idea that they really think about, they always have a lot of really high expectations. Now, I'm sure a lot of those came about in Walden. Now, was there any expectations that Jack and Dave had and you had of these real high ideals that didn't really come up in Walden when it first came out, when you first started?
Well, I suppose there were maybe 2 or 3 things that came up. One was that we knew that the students, I mean, we were going to turn into a Mount Parnassus kind of school, with gods and goddesses instead of just people. But that was the real expectation. I mean, you want to have a goal that is beyond your possible reach in order to get further than you would if you just said, I want to get to tomorrow. So we did have this euphoric feeling about doing something great. And we had identified it in some ways that, you know, the students should have a genuine desire to be articulate in the use of language and to have a basic knowledge of information that helps them live and understand their life a little bit better. But primarily among all those should be the desire to, or the feeling of the need to learn how to ask questions and answer them. And the other one, the last one, I guess, that we really felt was most important was that the students would feel a responsibility for their own education, and that the staff in the school should be an adjunct to serving that need, but that the school didn't have to require itself being in a building with teachers, that their experiences should also be a contributing factor in their learning, and that they could bring those experiences back to the school, and that they would feel that they were in charge of their life. And we felt that at the end of that first year, we were absolutely amazed at what had happened with many people. They were strong. They were people. For example, we had a kid who came to the school. His parents had encouraged him, and he said he would like to come. But when he came there, he'd sit in every class, and he was 6'8", just huge, massive person, and that's what he did. And by the end of the year, he was talking to people, and people didn't hate him. I mean, because he spoke to them. I mean, he roamed around like Frankenstein. You'd hear him go clomp, 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 walking down the hall, and everything would stop. You'd be in the middle of the most interesting discussion you had, and all of a sudden, this clomp, clomp, clomp would go, and everybody would stop and look. You'd walk by the door, look here. And but by the end of the year, he was comfortable, and he had friends, and they enjoyed him. And we had lots of cases like that. We had problems. We had things where we didn't win with everybody. Some people left. We didn't. We had a difficult time getting the staff to agree upon what needed to be done in order to develop the other things. You know, learning how to learn, how to ask questions, and what to do with your life. But the interesting thing was that the more we argued, the more the kids learned, because, for example, there was a guy by the name of Fred Jurgens, who was a science teacher who had worked at Johnston's for a while, was very conservative and very demanding and very arbitrary. And he and I would have real battles. But the more we fought, the more we got into each other's heads. And the more we argued, the more the kids learned, because we were both right. Except that he had one part of the handle and I had the other part of the handle. But the tool that we were working with was the same tool. So what we ended up doing was like, you know, if I put a string in my mouth and you put a string in your mouth and we start chewing up on the string, we ended up facing each other nose to nose, you know, and that's what we did. And we became one person, and we became very good friends.
Other questions, John?
Yeah. In the beginning, you said that the school district funded you. When and as the school grew, did you have much trouble getting more funding? I mean, like due to what the community said and things like that. And what was the community's view on Walden?
Well, there are two questions in there. The community's view was that we were a bunch of acid heads, you know. We terrible time arguing with the community. That was a gorgeous group of people. There were a couple of people who had problems with drugs, but we faced those right smack in the middle of their eye, you know, and they either got out or changed. And we didn't do it because we were autocrats. We did it because it was destroying them, you know. And so, but that community image, you still have the problem. You have one thing happen this year that really wasn't Walden, and all of a sudden Walden's back where it was back the first year we opened. As far as getting things, we discovered that, you know, like it's real handy to have a video camera and videotapes, and it's real handy to have computers. But before you have the videotape, before you have the computers, you should really introduce yourself to yourself and get to know yourself, and you can do that I think sometimes this keeps people from finding out who they are, you know. Sometimes you have to be on a desert island, so we weren't really concerned about a lot of things. For example, textbooks. Now every school in the district has textbooks that they get through Unified School District. Each school has a proportion of the money that's available for textbooks according to the students in that school. You know how we got our first set of books in our library? We got the budget percentage that belonged to our school. We hired rented a Ford Econoline van, made arrangements with Follett Publishing in Chicago, who handle libraries and, you know, book sales for all kinds of schools and colleges. And Dave and I went down, no, Dave and Jack and I, the three of us went down. We had $890, I think it was, to spend. They gave us, the Follett gave us, we could buy those books for 20% of face value, and a lot of them were secondhand. So we took these little gadgets that they had on wheels where you could stack books, you know, this way, little frame that you could roll around, and we all took off, and Fred Juergens went down too, so we get science books. And we just kept loading books on and bringing them back to this massive table that was almost as big as this room, piled the books up, and somebody's there. We had a couple students with us too, and they were tabulating the books. We had an adding machine. We tabulated the books as we came in with each new load. And when we got to $890, we quit, put them in boxes, and drove them back to Racine. And that's how we got our library. Isn't that a wonderful way to get a library for a school? Handpicked, nobody having to get into an argument about Slaughterhouse-5.
We got a problem with that now.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
That's the way it was. It really was. Can I ask you a question? Is this coming off all right, or is it, you know, because I'm pretty remote from where it was at that time, and I don't know if I'm filling in the details that you need to understand. For example, you know, have you talked about the name of the school?
Yeah. About Thoreau and Skinner.
Yeah, but do you know what they wanted to name it? Zappa.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask another question.
Well, he had the dibs on you.
Alright, so you started out the first couple of years and your ideas were fresh and all that, but as time went on, like, what happened to Walden that changed what changed Walden as time passed?
Age. I think institutions are, human institutions tend to take on human characteristics, I think. You know, as you move and get a little older, you get set in your ways. And pretty soon, well, that's the way we did it last year, and well, why don't we do it? If we do it that same way, then we'll maybe have a little time to do something else that's a little bit different. And pretty soon, all that time that you're going to use to do something different is used up by doing the same thing that you did before because that's the way we did it and it worked, and if it worked, why shouldn't it continue to be done? The problem with that is that learning should always be a fresh thing. For example, I think that if I were John, incidentally I knew John as a student, but if I were John, I'm going to get him in trouble on this, I would try to really pull the plug on Walden III and start Walden IV. Then all of a sudden you'd have chaos for a while, and all the people who are here would, not all of them, some of them, but they would, some people would be very uncomfortable, and other people would say, gee, that's going to be kind of interesting, but boy, that can be hard work. And we did this a couple times. We did it with TLC. And you don't know about TLC. Tender, loving care, but what was the...
Transition Learning Circle.
Yeah, Transition Learning Circle. And one of the things we always tried to do is to give a name to something that had some significance and could be used in a lot of different ways, like rope was originally ROP, rite of passage, but you couldn't do anything with ROP. But so you add a letter on the end, and it becomes rope, which becomes rite of passage experience, but it becomes rope. And then there's a wonderful poem by Lauren Isley called The Rope, which is in, I hope it's still in the rope package. I'm losing track of your question on oh yeah. So all these changes as they would come, like when we first did rope, it was really wide open and it was done, people really learned, experiences had extended the range of their experiences, they learned more about themselves, the staff learned about themselves because they had to conduct these in a very personal way where you'd have a student sitting there and you really got to find out what he learned and what he knew and what he didn't know, and if he didn't know something that was really essential to his future, by God, he'd better do something about finding it. You know, we had to do this in a very personal way. Little by little, that became more and more threatening to people, and all of a sudden the rope became something that's nice and polished, and you can deal it out, and you can collect it, and you can shuffle it, and you can deal it out again, and the hand comes out the same as it did before. The same thing was true with TLC. We thought we knew we had a trouble with people who just were fresh here. So what we did was we reinvented the original Walden within the school. And we had 9th and 10th graders who had never been here before, had to take Walden and learn how to be a member of Walden, which is what we went through what we went through in that old building when all of us had to do it. Well, John was in that, and John remembers that it was John and Al and Kameen and
Betsy, I think.
Betsy and me. And for a long time, I was the only one that was comfortable with it. That's right?
Depend on which day you're talking about,
Yeah.
I think.
Because what we were doing was having this room full of people and trying to figure out what are we going to do. And then we'd come up with something that was a way of focusing attention on something so that you kind of forget who you were, and they'd forget who they were, and we'd be working on something and arguing and pushing it around and taking it apart and looking at it. And but little by little, TLC disappeared because it really was a lot of work. And you know, anytime you're going to learn anything and teach anything, it's a lot of work. It really is. But it's a lot of work to run, isn't it? Or it's a lot of work to earn a lot of money, or it's a lot of work to become an artist, or it's a lot of work to become a great dancer, or it's a lot of work to have a band, or it's a lot of work, you know, anything you want to do and you want to do it well is a lot of work. If you want to be a human being, good one, and have fun and enjoy it, it's a lot of work. But that's work that we normally call fun or interest or, you know, call it work.
Jerry, we were talking before you came about the composition of the student body at Walden. We were wondering if Walden has been used through the years as an escape for white students primarily. We saw the BBC film of the first week or so, and it looked like the student body was very white. We know that today our student body racial composition is different from this. We have fewer minority students here. We also know that the school was expanded as part of a desegregation plan. Can you reflect on the student body, the racial composition of the student body? Have you seen students coming here to escape rubbing shoulders with minority students? And do you think that that's happened or not?
Oh yeah, I think it did. There are half a dozen occasions where that really surfaced. And I think that there are people, I suppose there are some here now too, there were people in the past who came here because there was a racial feeling that they didn't want to deal with this. I think that if those same people had gone to a regular school, they probably would not have developed as much in compassion or understanding as they finally did by coming here. I think that there's enough liberal idealism here in the staff and in the school that it gradually begins to touch people and say, you know, we really are kind of racist, and I guess we should begin to deal with that too. But then the students are only here for a while and they go, and so that probably does continue. I think that there are probably some parents whose approval of your coming here is partly related to that. I think that there is another end of it, though, is true. We've had, during the time I was here, several instances where there were disagreements between a white and a black student. I know that the first time that it happened was really kind of interesting. There was an argument right outside of the McMinn building that turned into 3 or 4 swipes being taken at each other, and somebody got hit. I think one of them got a bloody nose. And all of a sudden, they stopped. And they says, "We're getting the school in trouble." So that 2 of them went in, and at that time we had some very informal ways of dealing with each other. We could stand in the middle of the McMinn building and say, "Town meeting!" And everybody left whatever they were doing, and we went to this gym up on the 3rd floor and had a town meeting. And we did. And these 2 kids called a meeting, and they went and said, "You know, we had this fight." And by that time, most of the school knew because the fight was going on, and the kids started going out to see it, you know. But they got the group together and they said, "You know, this had nothing to do with school, it had nothing to do with race, it had to do with an argument that we were having about some money. And we want you to know that if this gets out and your parents find out about this and say, well, we had a racial fight, it wasn't a racial fight because we had nothing to do with race. And if anybody, you know," and so the discussion went on. And we've had some other examples of that here in this building too, when I was here. And almost always it never turns out to be race, but it turns out to be personal.
Now, one of Chuck's principal now, his favorite saying is, "Nobody fails and stays." He's got it on a nice little piece of paper up on his wall, and he loves that saying. Now, from the 3 years I've been going here, and especially at semester time, but every quarter, there's, I call it an ebb and flow of students that kind of in a way leech off of the alternative system. You know, they'll come in and not really work in the least, and they don't stay too long. You know, they'll be, you know, somebody will notice that a teacher, they'll show it up to Chuck, and he'll say, well, if you don't, you know, that's how nail came about. If you don't shape up, you know, you're shipping out. Did you always have that problem in the beginning of students coming in and going out? You know, the unmotivated or whatever you want to call students.
Well, I don't see anything wrong with failure. Part of the reason that I don't see anything wrong with failure is that I was I had perfected failure in high school. It took me 5 years to get out of a 3-year high school. I'd quit school every November and go to work at a department store through Christmas, and then I'd come back and I'd take one of the exams, and sometimes I'd pass and sometimes I wouldn't. And then I'd quit again a little after Easter and go to work at a nursery, and I just couldn't stand school. I was so bored, I just couldn't stand it. I wrote artificial book reports because we had to have these formal book reports, so I'd make up a book and an author it and write it and get a passing grade on it. I couldn't stand school. And so I know what it was like, and I think failure was a good thing for me because it made me have to retract and find out what caused me to fail and what I had contributed to the boredom and what the school had contributed to the boredom. And there was some, and as a matter of fact, when I finally, at that time when I was going to college, I got to college in the most mysterious way possible because I had the terriblest record you could imagine. But after the war, I went back. I was in Africa for 3.5 years. I went back and finished my last year of college and changed my major to English because I realized during the war that the language that we used to describe the world that we believed was there was so mixed up and so torturedly twisted into lies and error that I just was going to teach English. And I was going to teach it so that people would try to figure out a way how to make the world and the word agree with each other. And my practice teaching was with one of the teachers that I had during my professional failing time. And so I appeared one day with my information, and she knew that I was coming. Well, hi, Gary. And she said, well, this is what we're going to be doing tomorrow. You want to teach it? And it was something that I knew. And I said, yeah, okay. So I came back the next day, taught the class, and she was sitting in the back of the room. And she walked out and said, I think you'll be all right. It's the last time I saw her. So now what I'm saying is that I think that failure is, if I decide that you're a failure and send you away, you don't have any responsibility because I decided you were a failure and I made you the failure by determining that. The failure that is your failure is when you suddenly say to yourself, oh shit, I did that to myself. And the only way to do that, I learned this a second time, you know, when I was teaching, when I send a kid to the office, then I didn't have to deal with him anymore. And he didn't have to deal with me anymore. And he knew that I didn't understand him because I was the one that picked him up. And so when I was in administration, we were having a real problem with seniors who were being kicked out of school in their senior year because they didn't have enough credits to graduate. And I persuaded Mr. Ludeman to eliminate that rule and to not let a senior get, and no matter what he did, not to expel him, because then he could never say that the school threw me out. No, I don't think the Chuck is going to like that.
Jerry, I'm wondering if, I have heard a number of people say that they're somewhat disappointed that the school moved from a small school of around 150 to a bigger school with the junior high school, and it got to be so complex and there were competing interests to the point that the resources got spread very thin at Walden. Can you reflect on the move to the Franklin site? At the time, were people happy about the move or disappointed with the move? Did the move come entirely from the outside, or were there Walden people who were anxious to try out Walden, including the junior high school? How did this change, how do you feel that this change affected the school in the long run?
Oh, I think anything that you do different is going to bring about change. We kind of look forward to it. We knew that the McMinn building was going to be torn down. There was no way of saving it. We were kind of glad to be here, except that the janitor that we had here when we first came here had been here for years, and he was just real protective of the schoolboy. He thought, oh, we're going to just destroy the place. I saw what you guys did down at the McMinn building, and he was very uncooperative. He was the biggest problem we had. And he says, you know, we've been having to replace windows once a week, and here we are. We're not going to have any windows at all in here with this group here. So what we did, the very first week was here, we took some students and all the staff. It would be a couple of, one staff member and a couple of students went around and knocked on every door in this whole neighborhood and talked to the people in every one of those houses that we could find somebody home. We did this all week, and we talked about the school and what we were trying to do, answered any questions. People said, can our kids go there? And we said, yes, they can, you know, and because this is a corridor that these people who live here go to Case, you know. So we made friends with them, and school opened, and we waited and waited, and nothing happened. No problems, no neighborhood problems, no windows were broken, and it got better and better and better, and we went for the whole year without a single broken window. Then in the spring there was a window broken on the front lawn, except that it was because of somebody playing ball out there. And this janitor just couldn't believe what we had done. And we couldn't either, because it worked. And I'm saying that because there were a lot of other things that had come up that said, oh, how are we going to do that? How are we going to take care of these little kids? How are we going to put these kids together? What are we going to do? We had a smoking lounge at that time. How are we going to keep kids out of the smoking lounge that shouldn't be in the smoking lounge, you know, like those little kids? And these are legitimate questions that should be faced by society. And society is like what we had here. We suddenly had a different kind of person, younger in age. We had to pay attention to it. These kids had, the older kids had now to look at these younger kids and realize that they were the image for these kids. And some of them didn't think of that, but some of them did. So we had to spend a year trying to figure out how are we going to do this, which is what the nation should be doing, about how are we going to get rid of the people that have been destroying our nation now, you know. Instead of just being laissez-faire and saying, well, let it go when doggone it, Reagan is destroying the country, we should be doing something about it. Well, the same thing was true here. We got a problem. Well, we shouldn't have ever brought those young kids here. Why not? Don't they have right to the same kind of school? And sure, it was a little harder. We had to figure out how to do things and how to do things in a different way. And you can't get rid of a problem by separating it and putting it off someplace else. You have to learn how to deal with the problem. So the problem becomes a teaching force, you know, like anything, you know, like if the country goes broke now because of Reagan's administration, and we're going to have a depression, boy, you know, I've heard a lot, I don't want this to happen, and I hope it doesn't happen, because my kids are I have grandchildren now, and I don't want anybody to have to go through the Depression again. But the Depression really taught people some senses of value that they don't learn any other way. The same thing is true with bringing in those little kids. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Sure, it changed things. I'm sure it was harder. I'm sure it was puzzling. I'm sure we didn't know the answers. I'm sure we made a lot of mistakes. And sure that somebody maybe didn't benefit as greatly, but I'm sure there was another one who did benefit even more greatly. Is that true?
Jerry, could you, I know this interview is getting to be kind of long, and you may be tired, but there's a few other questions we've talked about. Could you tell us a little bit about your involvement with the print shop? Now, you describe yourself as an English teacher. You had a tremendous involvement here with the yearbook and the print shop. How did you get into that, and how did you see that as part of your work as an English teacher?
Well, I cheated a lot. When I was here, I taught everything that I ever wanted to teach anybody, because teaching something is a way of learning it. And there were so many things that I enjoyed, and I knew that I'd learned already that the more I taught something, the more it became mine, and that I could use it. So I had some interests. Mythology. I taught a class in mythology. One class, and it was kind of fun, you know. The thing is, I'm going to get to the print shop. But the thing is, the mythology was the perfect example of what teaching can do. If you ever have had a course in mythology, what you ended up getting was the Greek gods and their names and what they did and the cute little stories about their life, you know, or their function. But really, mythology, the word mythos and the word logos are the basis of what involves our way of looking at life. Logos is the language of logic and tangibility. This is a table. This is a cup. You're a human being. You know, this kind of thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers, letters. And mythos is that which cannot be explained except in some other way, like love, fear, those kinds of things, emotions especially. So the mythology that we have is a dead language and a dead civilization's way of handling those intangibles. We have them today. They're the myths that we use. We don't call them myths. We call them sensible, logical information, beliefs, liberty, rights, and so forth. But they're ways of explaining the way humans function. So I taught mythology that way. One class. All of a sudden, I had to do it every year that I was here after that. And sometimes I'd run 2 sections. And what would I get in there? 40, 50 people sometimes. And they were good classes. Now, I thought, well, we never got to that question thing. So I taught a class on how to ask questions and answer them. And we had some really interesting times, and that continued. Then I decided, well, let's do a little philosophy. Everybody should have a philosophy, and everybody has a philosophy. Everybody in this room has a philosophy. It's a way of believing how you live your life and why you live it the way you do and what it's going to do for you. There isn't anybody that hasn't a philosophy. But then, how do you ever look at it to decide, how do you know if something is really true? And how do you test it? And what's ethics? What does ethics mean? And so that's why ethics got into the rope experience, and it's disappeared now, I think, somewhat from it. But I think people have to learn how to look at things and do them right, because they've thought them out. Well, we ended up inheriting an old beat-up press. I don't know if it's still down there or not. It's the one in the closet in the back. Is that still there?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's one that's like the oldest press. There's only one press that's even older, and that's in Kenosha.
Okay, it's the old A.B. Dick, the little one. And it had been running for 24 hours a day for about 15 years at Unify. It used all night, all day, you know, over and over and over. And we got it, and nobody knew how to use it. And so I got a hold of Barry Larson, who was one of the students that was interested in it too. And we stood there and looked at it and said, let's come down Sunday and take it apart and see if we can figure out how to make it work. So we spent the whole day Sunday doing that. And we finally got it to work a little bit. And then we printed some things for the school, and then this is all done in a closet down there in the old McMinn building. And it was kind of fun, so we thought, I wonder if we could figure out how to do pictures. And so I went over to John Box, who was then teaching printing at Park High, and had him give me a quick lesson in halftones. And so we made some stationery. And I have it with me now. Then we printed the letterhead for the school, and that was kind of fun. Pretty soon we were doing things, we printed a little newspaper, some other things. And then we thought, let's do a yearbook. Nobody knew how to do it. You know, this was just, I never realized what a huge job I was taking on. I started in February. We went over and we'd work at Park High 5 nights a week. 3 students, myself, doing halftones and doing all the film, making the plates, coating the plates with a protective wax so that they wouldn't oxidize, brought them down to Walden, and then when we'd have time, we'd print them. We'd have to clean them off and then print them. And the quality was pretty bad, and there was no way that we could redo it because we couldn't, you know, catch up. There was just no time. We finished it, got it bound the first time 3 days before school was out. But once we made a yearbook, we had to keep it going because it was really so much fun. It really was fun. And I always got to write a little message to everybody that doesn't make sense at all at the time that they're looking at it because they're so eager to get out in the world. But I hope that someday they'll read it in the year 2001 or when they come to a reunion and say, yeah, my God, that bastard was right. But the print shop, I used to teach my classes. The room was bigger then. That room was cut in half later. But I had a lot of my classes in the print shop on the other side of a division line. And then I would use the print shop to teach the other things. For example, how do you read a novel? Well, a novel is made up of incidents and episodes and little tiny pieces of detail that are somehow related together. So all of a sudden you look at those details and there's a story. And how do you explain that? Well, the easiest way to explain it is to take the class over to the lights table, take a halftone, look at it with a magnifying glass, and you realize that it's made up of dots. And it's exactly, you make a picture out of dots, which is exactly what the author does when he writes a detail and a detail and a detail and a detail and a detail, and it turns into a picture. And so we use it for other things too. It became a real place because we worked there not as teacher-student, because people like Barry Larson, and I had to learn as we went along, and sometimes he would learn how to do something by figuring it out that I hadn't figured out, so that he'd end up having to teach me. And the way I ran the thing, I think, is pretty much the way Phil runs it now, is that you learn how to do something, and then from now on, you just come in and here's a job that needs to be done, and you take it in and you do it. If the film needs to be done, don't you do it that way? And you do it. And there are more people from Walden teaching, doing professional print shop work from this school, then in total from all the other schools in the same period of time, figure, 15 years or so, that there are more students out of here who are printers than out of all of the rest of the high schools in the city of Racine. Because in the others, they get a lesson to do, and they go in and they do it, and then they come back out and they get it checked off on the book so that if they're done with that now, they don't have to do it anymore, right? Here, it's your job, and if it doesn't work, my God, people are going to use that. In the other schools, when they come to printing something that is going to be used like a program at a concert or something, that's done by a very select group of people, or maybe the printing teacher himself. Whereas here, if you did something that was going to be used by somebody, it's a real thing, and that's the best thing about Walden, is that everything that is done here that is really going to be used, like the best thing that could be done is that you really use that at a staff meeting.
We will.
And I would welcome the staff to respond to it.
Thank you very much. You should know that the students are here, have not had a break in 2 hours and 15 minutes, and they've been all paying attention for the whole hour and 15 minutes that you've been on this tape. So thank you very, very much,
Well,
Sherry.
thank you. I felt very much at home because my classes never stopped ever. In fact,